Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the next webinar in the D2L series here. This one is for the Gamification Network. Gamification Network is something we started last year. We'll talk a little bit more about it right before we introduce the speakers. My name is Barry Dahl. I have the pleasure of serving as the Teaching and Learning Advocate at D2L. And one of the things I do is host this Tuesday afternoon series of webinars. You can let me know if you are interested in being a presenter. We will see how we might be able to slot you in so you can share your expertise, your effective practices with the broader audience. We do have a kind of a one-stop shop for our webinars. Let's see, I think I can drop that into the chat here. I think I'm ready to do that. Let me find it. Yep, there it is. And on that, not only will you see the upcoming webinars that you can register for, but lots and lots of recordings from previous webinars. Yes, this one is being recorded. Since you registered for it, you will be receiving an email with a link to the recording once it's been processed. But that's also something that the people who registered and aren't here right now, they'll still get it. And a lot of people do that kind of as a strategy so they can watch it on demand on their own time. Feel free to do that if you are so inclined. Here's just a couple of the quick snippets from that page. Let's see, not tomorrow. This is Tuesday. Thursday, instructional design, best practices, tips, and tricks with Andrew Dare of D2L is something that I'm kind of interested in myself, so I put it on the page. Then for the Course Quality Improvement Network, we have a week from today, the Tuesday afternoon series, the gold standard. That's the quality improvement process that they use at the University of Memphis. We're going to hear about that. 3 weeks from today, personalizing your online courses with Reed Dixon from Pima Community College. And just one example of the many on-demand webinars I selected from our Course Quality Improvement Network, the Introduction to Universal Design for Learning is one that you can find on that page, along with dozens of others. Also, Fusion is our big deal each year, and registration is open for Fusion. It will be virtual again in 2021, so it's also free. And you can register today. We are working on the agenda. We have a lot of proposals from customers who would like to do presentations. So we're still working on what the details of that agenda will look like, but 6 days in July. And so we hope that you will join us for our virtual Fusion. And with that, it is time to introduce our speakers for today. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm pleased to be able to welcome three educators from the University of, from DePaul University, excuse me. Melissa Koenig, who is a steering committee member for Fusion and has been for many years, and two of her colleagues, Carrie and Jess. And Jess, if you are ready, you can take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Barry. Hi, I'm Jess, and welcome to Getting Started with Easy and Low-Tech Techniques in the part of the Gamification Network series. So today we're going to go through first introduction so that you know who all of us are. I'm going to briefly talk about why games and learning. You know, if you're here, you might already have some ideas about that, but we thought it would be great to include. Melissa's going to talk about an intro game that she developed and also how to gamify discussions. Carrie's going to talk about her gamified syllabus, which is really super cool. I'm going to showcase 2 simulations I made, and then we did bake in some time for Q&A. So Melissa, Carrie.
Sorry, I had to uncover my mute button. So my name is Melissa Koenig, and I'm the Director of Instructional Technology in the Center for Teaching and Learning at DePaul. And I'll let Carrie go next.
Hi, I'm Carrie. I'm the Assistant Director of Instructional Technology. I'm the only one who doesn't have a pet.
Again, I'm Jess. Hi, I'm an instructional technology consultant at DePaul, and unfortunately my pets are not co-hosting today, but they are there for you to look at. So why games? If you're here, you have some thoughts about this already. I'm excited that you're all here, but just first and foremost, students like games. This is a way to help meet students where they are. Students are playing games, students of all natures, all shapes, all sizes, all ages, all backgrounds. Games are an everyday part of lots of folks' lives. There are lots of different kinds of games, and this is something that help make education more palatable to those who, you know, might be resistant, but games are a great way to get closer to students without necessarily telling them that's what's happening. Games are also often structured in a very similar way that education is in terms of goal setting. And there was a paper that was recently, like very recently, as in the last week, released about attaching gamification elements to the SMART goal setting framework in a way that shows exactly how to align those like game mechanics to SMART goals. And that's something that maybe we could talk about in the future. Games also facilitate collaboration and teamwork in a really idiosyncratic way that students are used to. So students are used to coordinating and cooperating in games, and it can make something like a group project a lot more palatable and a lot more fun. Games also include feedback loops that give the opportunity for immediate feedback, iteration, and practice in a safe space. This is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next slide regarding simulation. But then, finally, games are a really great way to include active learning in your classroom, even in your remote classroom, as all the things we're going to talk about today are things that we implemented in the virtual classroom, and it's something that makes your class more engaging. I do want to also talk about specifically the pedagogical benefits of virtual simulation. And this is something that's being used a lot more widely recently, but also especially in healthcare higher ed. I think the biggest reason for that is that it does give students a very safe space to fail. So students are able to make decisions and practice things in a situation that doesn't necessarily involve a real patient or a real outcome. It allows instructors a really clean and quick way to assess their knowledge and provide feedback in the moment in a way that might actually interrupt the simulation in a non-virtual setting. It standardizes the experience for students, which is really important, and allows cleaner assessment and feedback, but also makes it such that every student is for sure getting the same education. And it also offers experiences that students may not be able to have. So this is something that you can do through virtual reality, but even just through simulation in general, we're able to create circumstances that are, can be imagined, but not necessarily replicated in the real world. And finally, it's another really great place to practice collaborative skills. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing. Let's see if I can get screen two. There we go. All right, so hopefully y'all can see my screen and it's not being overshadowed by anything.
You're good.
Controls. All right. So we're sort of going to go from low-fi to higher fi. So I'm going to start with sort of the least complex and probably the easiest things that people can add. Carrie's going to add a bit of complexity to that, and then Jess is going to, as she mentioned, talk a little bit more about some more complex things, but still on a lo-fi side. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can gamify introductory activities, and some of these I think are pretty well known, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on them, but thinking about fun ways to get students to introduce themselves to the class that really go beyond who are you, why did you take this class, and what's your major, right? So especially when you're talking about students that are maybe never going to see each other in person, finding ways to get them to start to build community and engage with each other. And so there's some really simple ones that I think most people know about. I use 2 truths and a lie in the course that I teach. And one thing that's really interesting is it's not novel or unique in any way. I mean, that's used lots of places, but I have had many students say, just in general and also on course evaluations, like, I knew the course was going to be different because the intro discussion was so different than every other course that I've taken. We had a music faculty who started theirs with, if you were an instrument, what instrument would you be and why? So thinking about, again, I know my boss had one where she used to ask people in interviews what color M&M they would be and why. So again, starting to get at something that's a little bit more fun way of introducing people. Snowball's another one. This actually comes up a lot in Pi because it's harder to do snowballs in D2L because you can't lock it and make everyone follow the same discussion thread. But the idea behind that is building connection, right? So somebody posts first and you have to take something that they said, add to it, and then continue to build. So you're learning how you are like the person that's next to you, and that person's learning how you're, so you're building upon that. So the challenge that we had, as you go to the next one, is at DePaul, all freshmen take a course in which they're supposed to discover or explore the city of Chicago. The course that I'm involved with, typically we have an immersion week. We spend a week together traveling around the city of Chicago, going to places, learning how to ride the L, learning about the different neighborhoods, etc. I don't know, global pandemic, no one came to campus. We weren't allowed to travel around. We had to figure out how to build that community. The important piece of this Discover or Explore class, depending on which version of it you take, is that building of community. As students learn, they make friends, they build community. And we really struggled with how do we get them to start to interact and have those conversations about what is it that you're interested in, what do you like doing, those types of things, when they were not in a space where they could have those casual conversations. We were meeting synchronously in Zoom, so we were seeing them, but it was much harder to build that. So I did a little searching, and there's a link to this. You can watch the tutorial. I won't go through how you do this, but I created a Mad Libs game for introductions. We did this in Zoom breakout rooms. So we randomly assigned students to the breakout rooms, and they had to ask each other the questions. If you guys have played Mad Libs, you know, you ask for certain things, you fill it in, and then you get a crazy story that gets spit out based on that information. So it was built with Google Forms and an Autocrat add-in for Google Sheets. I'm gonna see if this works. Hopefully this flips for me. So this was the form that they filled out. You're seeing a Mad Libs form now. And they just had to answer something you collect, something else you collect, your name of your favorite amusement park or fair, favorite subject, favorite animal plural, favorite plant or flower, place to relax, mythical creature, a boy name, a girl name, an extinct animal, and a mythical place. And then this was the back end. And so this is where it was feeding into. And what would spit out would be a description. This is the description of the Field Museum in Chicago. And so we basically recreated, 30 of these. So this one was originally founded to house the shoes and clothes collections assembled for the Six Flags, this massive math museum. Still packs them in with more than 30 permanent exhibits covering 300,000 square feet. Guests come from around the world to see towering giraffes, marvel at dandelions, or relax at the beach, while a gigantic dragon skeleton named Christopher now guards the lobby. You'll find the field's previous greeter, Jane the dinosaur, residing in the Olympus exhibit. So you can see that a variety of these things, and it's just fun and it's silly, but it got students sharing and perhaps participating in a way that, this is the first class. They didn't know each other. And it gave them a way to sort of connect in a silly way that potentially gave them a little bit more, made them a little bit more comfortable. All right. Do you see there's a question, but I'm going to move to the next one. The second thing I want to talk about is a gamified discussion. So one of the things that we recommended to our faculty, we actually polled our students after the end of the spring term last year. And what we heard from students was, there's a lot of technology. I'm in technology a lot. And so we really said to faculty, you kind of need to pull back on adding a lot of extra things. So you might be using one extra tool outside of the learning management system in your class, but so is everybody else. And then that's 4 or 5 new things you have to learn. So figured I need to practice what I preach. And I have had a class that I teach, I've had a blog assignment for years. It's a current event topic, and students need to contribute things that they find a couple of times during the term. Always had problems with at least a few students that couldn't figure out how to get into the blog. We had a change in their email that was going to make it more complex. I was like, we're just going to figure out how we do this in D12. I looked at a variety of different ways to do it and finally settled on using the discussion board, creating a gamified rubric, and and grading all the threads, which is something that we always are like, why would you ever want to do that? And I finally figured out why I might want to do that. So I'm going to kind of pop over here and show you that. I should mention, though, that I also created a conditionally released news item that explained how the grading worked once students started getting grades, because they were like, I don't understand, why did I only get 10? It's like, well, because that's how many points you've earned thus far. You're earning points versus points being taken away. So in this situation, it's a social media marketing class. They're supposed to go out and identify campaigns that are interesting to them, write them up, share them with their classmates. But as you can see from the rubric, they had a variety of different ways that they could earn points. They had to earn 100 points, and they had maximums at different things. So they couldn't just write 4 posts in the first week and be done with it. They could write only original posts and be done. So they could not respond to anybody at all ever if they wanted to. They could write no original posts and just respond a lot to people. And the interesting thing about this, there were 15 people in this section of the class. This is a glimpse of the topic statistics here. And there are 45 posts, 81 total replies within it. And that's with 15 students. I don't participate in this at all. And I mean, I've never gotten this level of engagement. Maybe it was a fluke. I tried it again, same level of engagement. The cool thing about it is that students got to pick, they got to choose how they participated. Not every student earned 100 points. Some students got a 70, right? Because they chose to participate at that level. But it gave them control over how they might want to participate in the discussion. And they could decide, and if they waited to the last minute, it was going to be much harder for them to make those points up versus if they participated all along. The A students certainly participated at every single level. They did the maximum number of posts each week. They responded to a lot of people and they earned way more. I also had some Easter egg opportunities or special opportunities. So in the fall, there was during the election week, they could post their favorite election campaign and they could earn extra credit points. And so those I just kept track of separately. So it's really easy when you go to grade. You just grade the individual discussions. You can see the new ones they've done, see which ones you haven't graded. If they do post things like, yeah, that was cool, I just skip those. They don't get points for them. But then it was very easy to grade them. So those are 2 really sort of simple things. They didn't take a lot of extra effort. I didn't have to be a programmer or a game designer. I do have some game people in my family. So my husband and son both do game stuff. So I did run the rubric through them a little bit to see how it might play. I do want to tweak it a little bit, but it was a very simple, way to add some engagement and gamification into a courses. I'm going to stop sharing and Carrie's going to take on. I'm happy to share the rubric and the URL, all the slides will be shared as well. So you'll have access to that. Those are 2 of the questions that came up.
And I'll add too, I totally stole that assignment from Melissa when I was teaching. Like I just told her like, hey, I'm going to use this in my class. And in my evals this quarter, a lot of my students mentioned that that was actually one of their favorite assignments. They were like, hey, that was the one thing that stuck out to me because I got to do whatever I wanted. They got to look for things that was interesting to them. It wasn't me telling them what to do as much anymore. So it does give a little bit of control back to the students, which they appreciated, which I appreciate too. It ended up being a little bit less work for me, which in a quarter like this one was really nice. In addition to, I'm going to go to this next slide. In addition to my job as the Assistant Director of Instructional Technology, I teach similar to Melissa and similar to Jess. I happen to teach first year writing. So I teach our composition and rhetoric courses. I have been teaching since about 2016. So I noticed that, oh my gosh, that was 2 years. I had to literally look at a calendar to see what year it is and realize that this was about 1.5 years ago now. I started to feel my things getting a little bit stale and I wanted to rethink things. So I like to do puzzles. I like to play video games. I got a Nintendo Switch. I will give a lot of credit to this for getting me through quarantine and the pandemic. But if we take a trip to the before times, before everything went bananas, my class was still in person. And I wanted to kind of rethink my gradebook because I was really struggling having students not understanding entirely what was going on with their grades. I used a weighted gradebook, which for me was really easy to flex my scales of grading. So if I wanted to add assignments or change numbers, it was really easy for me. But it was harder for my students to understand and kind of keep up with me on what was going on. So I wanted to rethink my gradebook, and I happened to be playing a new game, and I decided to use that as my inspiration. So if you've ever played the game, you might recognize the background. I used Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So this is the game I was playing, and I decided to use this as my inspiration for my students and myself of how I was going to change both kind of my syllabus and my grading perspective in my class. So here is a hyper quick overview of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. If you've played this game, please do not judge me for being overly redundant or overly overview of this. Here's the basic. You play a character called Link, not Zelda. I got that wrong the first few times. So you play a character called Link, you travel around this world, and your goal is essentially finding shrines. You go through these shrines, they're like puzzles, which I enjoyed. Like I said, I love puzzles. You go through these shrines and you have to collect these orbs. You exchange these things for hearts. So you have to collect hearts in order to get the Master Sword. The whole goal of the game is to defeat this evil villain. And you have to have this Master Sword in order to do it. But in order to defeat the villain and get the sword, you have to get the hearts, and you have to do some things you don't want to do along the way. There were things I avoided in playing this game. There were shrines that were too hard and they made me mad, and I left them. And I realized that this ended up being a fairly good metaphor for grading and students in assignments, that there are sometimes assignments that we don't want to do, but we kind of have to in order to get the end result we want, which is either get the grade you want or defeat the villain of the video game, depending on the perspective you want to take. So I use this as my example when I show this to my class. So when we go over our syllabus, I full disclosure tell them that this is totally ripped out of a video game. I don't try and hide it from them. So what does this actually have to do with the syllabus when you think about it from a gamification perspective, not just like a video game? So from my perspective, it's about framing the student mindset and Easter eggs. Melissa's already talked a little bit about Easter eggs. I'm going to build on that a little bit. So in terms of framing, what I like to tell my students is that there are tasks that you have to do in order to level up. When you play a video game, you start at 0. You have to work your way up and level yourself up. You don't start at A and then get beaten down. You're in control of where you go. And there are going to be things that are obviously more fun than others. I teach first year writing. I'm a required class. I know students don't love being there. Just accepted that for myself. So I know that not all of my assignments are really exciting. My students write an annotated bibliography. Every time at the end of the quarter, my students tell me that that's the worst assignment they have to do, but it's required. It's not fun. I try and make some as fun as I can be, but some will be more challenging and some will be more fun. It's the same as a video game. So if I try and frame it to them like that, it makes it a little bit easier to think about. And I also remind them that there is a sequence. I sequence my class a certain way, and following that sequence will make it easier for my students. That does not mean, though, that if you miss an assignment, it's not worth going back to do it. So let's say you didn't do reading number 2, you didn't do that quiz, you didn't do that assignment, and we're now on 3, that you should go back to do it. There's always a reason to go back to something and turn it in and get it done to help you compete in the end, to complete things in the end, rather than just skipping them and not coming back to them. Having that experience and having that extra heart container is worth it at the end, rather than skipping it. So while I do build things out in a certain way, and while when we build syllabi, we build curriculum very intentionally, there's always room for students to want to go back and have space to go back. So I think when you build a syllabus like this, it's really important to frame to your students that this isn't about you taking things from them, but them building themselves up. So I like to remind myself that they are the main character in the term. I am not there to take things from them. They are the ones in control. They are the player. I'm just there to help them along. They get to earn their points. I don't take them away. You can see this in the rubrics. I'll show you all of the rubrics I use in my class are available to my students on day one. And they're all set up so that when I start grading, they're automatically set at 0. So as I'm grading, they have to work to earn the point. They don't start at 100, so then I'm deducting and thinking about what they didn't do, but I'm looking for what they did do. So it's also a change of framing for me and thinking about what are my students doing to earn their points, not what did they do not to earn them. So there's a little bit of a framing change for both of us. But I also give them a list of points that say, here's how many points you need to reach, the next level, level A, level B, and I'll show you what that looks like in my syllabus. But at the end, I say, everything is in your control. I am not the one in control of your grade at this point. It's actually been an incredibly freeing experience for me as an instructor, to let them know that they're the ones in control. And it's been a lot less pressure on me the last few quarters, that they've taken more ownership over that. And I've actually seen them feel more confident in their own grades and take more responsibility for when things don't go well. As far as Easter eggs go, I call these side quests just because it's funny and it goes along with the theme. But I offer a lot of extra credit. Funny enough, most people don't end up doing it. I had, I think, 27 points of extra credit available this quarter, and I think 3 of my 46 students took it. And they took maybe 5 of those points. So not many of my students end up going for the extra credit because they don't need it. They follow the pattern and they keep up with things in a way that they don't tend to need the extra credit if they're staying on top of things. But I'm very transparent about what is and isn't available. But I also do have things that are hidden Easter credit points or Easter eggs that are extra credit. So in the first week I say, hey, put up a profile picture. It's just easier for me if you put a profile picture up in D2L. But I don't tell them that they have to do it. If they do, I give them an extra point, and in the grade book it shows up as bonus, thanks for putting up a profile picture. So some things they don't know are extra credit until they do them. Similar to video games, sometimes you don't know you're going to get a prize until you do it. And I don't tell them. They have to kind of find it, and sometimes they tell each other, and it's really funny when they tell me that, Jordan told me that if I did this, I'd get the point. I'm like, okay, well, that defeats the purpose of it, but here we are. So I let them kind of figure it out and work each other with that one. But hiding those things, it kind of encourages them to kind of poke around the course a little bit more and be a little bit more engaged in the online section, as well as when we're face-to-face, it encourages them to work through the online course, which I try to build as a companion to our face-to-face course. Now, D2L has made my job a lot easier in doing this, I'm not gonna lie. In part because I can just set all of these settings up on day one, ideally like 2 weeks before day one. But I can have all these things set up and then they just run their course for the whole quarter. So this is all on one page, and you can like screenshot this, or I can help anyone who has questions. But I use a points gradebook. I no longer use a weighted gradebook because my students find them more straightforward. Weighted gradebooks, the joke I always gave instructors when I was working with them early on was they're like, whose line is anyway, the points don't matter. Which is really helpful for us, but really confusing for students. Sometimes it's really hard for them to figure out what that actually looks like and how that plays out at the end of the quarter. Points are really straightforward. It's really hard for students to be confused when it comes to points gradebooks. I treat ungraded items as 0. So that means on day 1, everyone's at 0. It means everyone's really confused on day 1 and everyone thinks they're failing on day 1. means I have to send out an email and reiterate about 4 times that not everyone is failing in the first week. But it does mean that everyone does get to slowly watch their grade move from, F to D to C to B. And it's really exciting to have them watch that movement and watch themselves kind of level themselves up. I also let them see their final grade as of day 1. I don't hide that from them. They watch that move on their own the same way I watch it move. I have rubrics for all my assignments. Like I said, with level 0 as default. So there's always extremely transparent information about what I'm grading them on, and what's available. All the modules have sequence start dates, in part because I am not the best planner in terms of recording my lectures. If I could, I would have them all open on day 1, but I usually don't record my lectures until like the day before they were supposed to be released. But releasing my modules on a schedule, everything had a scheduled due date, but they didn't close until the end of the quarter. So that meant that even if it was due in week 3, you could still turn something in until the end of the quarter. In my book, late work is better than no work. And then I had a list of the points you need for every level. So here's a screenshot, a couple screenshots. Those are what my grade settings look like. And then in my syllabus, I literally list out the points for each section. So students know exactly how many points they need for which level they want. I also, if you recognize this, this is one of the new 3.0 templates, I think. They're called the 3.0 templates, using the accordions. So this is all built in my course, so students see it on day 1, exactly what they need. And then lastly, my rubrics are built out, again, left to right. So everything I see starts at 0, and I have to think about what they earned. So that's all I have. And I think the next thing, Melissa.
I think I might actually be next.
Oh, nope.
That's okay. I'm actually going to talk for just a minute or two before I screen share. But I'll preface my next section here by explaining that both of the activities that I developed for this next section, which as Melissa and Carrie both described, is kind of ramping up the complexity a little bit, not unobtainably, but a little bit. Both of these were previously in-class, face-to-face synchronous activities. And so these both of the instructors that are, the owners of these activities initially came to me basically with a design challenge. And I am a game designer. I do program, but neither of these projects necessitated any of that. For both of them, I used Zoom and Google Slides, and that was pretty much it. So I am going to screen share now. I don't want anyone to be overwhelmed by how beautiful this slide is after seeing Carrie's slides. I named this the Synchronous Remote Design Challenge Monopoly because what this instructor had been doing in a health disparities class was using the game of Monopoly to demonstrate economic disparities impact on healthcare and on people throughout their lives. And this instructor built a brilliant activity where she broke the system of Monopoly. So she changes the rule set not only to begin with. So all of the students start with different amounts of money, but also some students start with property, and some students start being able to roll 2 dice or 3 dice, whereas some students start in jail or can't roll any dice or can only roll 1. And the game starts out very much not the way that the traditional rule set for Monopoly starts out. This instructor also then develop this activity so that 30 minutes into the game, which she usually has them play for about an hour, hour and a half, which as many of you might know is not typically enough for the standard game of Monopoly. It can get very, very long. But 30 or so minutes into play, the instructor says, okay, everyone's set back to equal. Everyone can roll 2 dice. If you're in jail, you're out of jail. The money stays where it is. The property stays where it is. But she does this to demonstrate the impact of economic disparity just from the get-go. So the point she's trying to make is that things don't always change even when the rules change halfway through. I think that this is a really important lesson and really amazing and like such a great thing that she developed. But when the university went fully remote, she came to me to say, Jess, how do I play Monopoly online? And there are a couple, right off the bat, there are a couple ways this could be handled. Yes, probably there is a way that we could have used the physical board games, which she does own. So she owns 6 copies of Monopoly specifically for this class. Probably there's a way that it could have worked where like either she played with her family in real time and put a document camera or some sort of camera over the board so that everyone could see what was happening and they could witness it. But the things she brought to me is saying is basically just like it's not the same unless the students get to experience it. And I don't want to make them do something weird or bad, in place of this beloved activity. So I said, okay, let's figure it out. And I chose to rebuild the game of Monopoly piece by piece in a Google slide. I will show that to you in just a moment. First, I do want to walk through, I talked about the altered rule set. This did happen in synchronous Zoom play. So the students were broken into 6 groups. They all went into breakout rooms and used these virtual Monopoly boards that I created in Google Slides. They were all given a link that was set to share so that anybody with the link could edit. And that's really important because every single piece or image on the board is a separate object on the board and it has a transparent background. So all of these things are drag and droppable. That's the way that it works. Students started with different dollar amounts, but you can see they're just very easily displayed the whole time, and students can just change them based on the purchases they made. This I actually think is an improvement to the game of Monopoly. I will submit it to Parker Brothers and let them know. Way easier than using money. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. And then finally, I used virtual dice. So there are tons of random number generators online. This was not a hard thing to find or source, but I put a link to a virtual 6-sided die on the bottom of the sheet, and then also a link to a random number generator to roll 1 through 17 for both the community chest and the chance cards. So let me show you what that looks like. This is what it looks like in the version that is untouched. You can see that this has not been played by any students, but the way that it works is if I want to play as the hat, I can drag myself over to go. If I then wanted to roll a die, I could use, there's the random.org/dice. I set that to be rolling at 6. I can roll that, and then however many spots I need to go, I can drag myself. If I wanted to purchase this property, I would just change my dollar amount here and then drag the property down into the space that is my player column. I did have it set so that they can just very easily copy and paste so that it's very clear which player is which. And then when they do land on, a chance card or community chest, they would just roll 1 through 17 to see which card it is. This isn't a perfect one-to-one representation of how these two things work, but it is a pretty reasonable remote adaptation for this kind of activity. And I do want to show you what it looked like after students played. So this is pretty cool. You can see that the instructor made her point with flying colors. The student who started with the most ended with the most by and large. This is something cool that I can't show you for protecting students who played this, but if you click on the edit history, you can actually see move by move what happened in the game. This is something that I think is really great and I wish that I could show you, but because student names are present since several of them were logged in, I'm going to not do that. But I'd be happy to blank it out and send something out in the future if anyone wants to see what that looks like. But basically it just shows you a timestamp, what the move was, who did it, and I think that that's very cool. So this was one of the things that I worked on just through Google Slides and Zoom. The other is something that is akin to Model UN. And this is another beautiful slide. But the way that this activity worked in person is that the instructor would assign 2 students to be both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So these are important because this instructor chose to make those 2 students always the 2 who at the point in time were getting the highest grade in the class. And then those 2 get the responsibility of distributing funds to all of the other students who are each representing a different country. They then get a 50-minute synchronous Zoom session to wheel and deal and play a trading game where all of the coins that were given to them, and I'll show that just briefly after this, they can make deals trading both capital and also trade goods. So all of the countries had to do research. This is actually an 8-week project that we designed to unfold over the span of 8 weeks where the students were assigned their countries. They have to fill out a worksheet with like very specific kind of baseline details, but then as the quarter progresses, they have to dig deeper and deeper into different aspects of these countries and their economic traits and like what their trade goods are, the countries that they have traded with, what their stance is for various political issues, and how they have or haven't interacted with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in the past. I think that this is a really cool activity, and usually the instructor centers the entire class around it. So it was a really big deal that we got this right. And usually it's also run with Hershey's Kisses or some sort of like candy or fun currency. We weren't able to recreate that bit. But the trading bit, you know, as fun as it can be using a Google slide in lieu of chocolate, I think we were able to do it. So let me pop out here once again and show you what this looks like. And these students actually chose to copy the slide every time they distribute a fund. So I'm going to just like quickly scroll through. But and on the day of, every student in Zoom changed their name to their country. Many of them set the flag as their virtual background, which I just was like really excited about. But the student was role playing as their country, much akin to how they would in Model UN. And this happened beforehand, where the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank students actually recorded a video of themselves that I really wish I could show, but I can't at this point in time, where they went through and for each move, one of them got to choose which country would be given money. So someone just decided all of a sudden to make it rain on Finland, and they had the ability to do that. That is part of the game. So you can see as this progressed, what ended up happening is that the students reached all of the funds being distributed, except for that these two blanked out countries ended up not being able to attend on the day of, so those funds were sent back to the Nether. But everyone else was able to trade with the amount of coins and goods that they had allocated to them by the time the synchronous Zoom session was happening. And so when it was happening, the way that it worked is that students would whisper one another or send private chats to one another in the main Zoom room and say, hey, would you like to go chat in breakout room 10? Then they would self-select breakout rooms where they would go and have a negotiation. This is something that we were hoping to actually record and put out into the world. We did get some footage and anonymized it to the best of our abilities. We're not there yet, but watching it happen was very, very cool. And this is another thing that we were able to do just using Zoom and Google Slides. So this isn't a paid advertisement for Google Slides, definitely not. But I will say, don't underestimate the power of PowerPoint and Google Slides, because PowerPoint is essentially a supercomputer and Google Slides is essentially PowerPoint. So that's all I have to say about those two simulations. And I think now we are going to open this up for Q&A.
There were a couple of questions that came in that maybe we can kind of just address. So certainly, Barry, we'll make sure you get a copy of the slideshow, which does have the links that will take you to some of the things. We can add the rubrics. Carrie and I are happy to share the rubrics that we use. So that was asked a couple of times. And there's a question here. Google Slide is free. It's part of the Google Suite. So you just need to have an account on Google to do it. And Jess, there was a question about whether or not in order to use the slides, the students have to have an account. You just had, yeah.
Yeah, so they didn't. So the way that I set it up was intentionally done that way to protect them from having to make accounts. So most of them will have Gmail accounts, but if they don't, the link was set specifically to have the settings where it's anyone with this link, which is not the default setting, but anyone with this link can edit. And so what that does is that it fixes a set of characters to the end of the link that basically says whenever they click on it, anyone who's got the link with that specific set of characters at the end, when they access it, they can do anything they need to it. So they did not have to have Google accounts.
Let's see. There was a question about with the discussion whether the points were given automatically. They're not. So that's definitely not something that is available now in discussions in D2L, but it's done manually. And honestly, it wasn't an onerous thing to do. You just need to stay on top of it. And it gives you the ability then to make a quality judgment of, especially for the responses, about whether or not it was substantive, right? So, and definitely I think I'll probably tweak the rubric a bit, although I've, so far I've done it 2 or 3 times, used it two times now. And it's held up pretty well. Like I haven't had anyone really finish the first week. But, if you want to get 100 points in the first week and then be done with it, that's okay too.
Yeah, I actually ended up having to tweak my rubric. So Melissa's class runs, yours is 5 weeks, right?
5 weeks, yeah.
Melissa's class runs 5 weeks, mine runs 10. So I actually ended up having to tweak mine to be more broad. Because my students were like, I'm at week 4 and I'm just like sitting around and I want to keep going. So they wanted more max points. And I was like, oh, I'm scratching my head like I didn't expect that. So I actually had to broaden mine a little bit. So I actually had to pivot a little bit because my students wanted to do more, which I did not expect.
And I think when you build it, you can decide what is most important from a reward standpoint. So much like, you know, from a game design thing, there's things that you can do, little things that add up, right? Or you can do bigger things that add up, and the bigger things should be harder, and they're worth more because of the effort that you put into them. But that doesn't negate you could get to the same point by doing a bunch of little things as well. So when you think about as I thought about it, I was like, what is it that to me should get the most reward? And then what is still rewarded, but at a lower level?
Barbara asked if this discussion rubric would be doable for larger groups. And I know you said your class was 17?
We had 15.
15?
Yeah,
my class was 46. So I'm not sure if that's kind of the larger group that you're thinking of, but it worked really well for my class at 46. And it was surprisingly manageable for me as an instructor. I will say grading from the grades area with that little helpful orange button that appears that tells you a student has done a new post really makes that a lot easier.
You also, when you grade, it will tell you how many unassessed posts. If you grade from the discussions, it'll tell you how many unassessed, when you've set it to grade each thread, for, you know, each thing the student does, it'll tell you how many unassessed ones there are. So that also is a good key. And both Carrie and I did both more with a discussion that was sort of, you're going out, you're finding things, you're bringing them back, you're adding, you know, you're applying what you're learning by finding things in the outside world and telling us how they apply to what we're learning. But it could totally be done in a class situation in which you want to simulate that discussion that happens. So asking more open-ended questions and then saying, you know, in the next 2 weeks, for example, you need to, you know, earn X number of points by sharing something you learned, asking a question, responding to a question, those types of things. So to say, you know, in this module on the historical significance of the Byzantine Empire, you know, you need to talk about, you know, the things you still have questions about, whatever it is. And so again, you would build a rubric that rewards those things that you're trying to get the students to do, right? So when I talk about rubrics, when I'm working with faculty, I often talk about, they're like, well, I don't want people to play to the game, right? Be like, oh, well, I have to do this to get that. And I'm like, yeah, but you can use it to control behavior, to modify behavior, to say, in order to earn these points, these are the things you need to do. You can get to it multiple ways, but here's how you earn points. I don't think there's anything wrong with prescribing in that way. Other questions?
So I think that you've addressed everything from the chat and the Q&A, but we can give them a minute or two, and for any last questions to come in. While we're doing that, giving them that chance, I'd just take this opportunity to thank all three of you for sharing your ideas here today. Lots of good, positive reinforcement in the chat as well, not in the form of questions, but just in oohs and ahs on a few of those. That's very nice. I'd also just, I'll take this opportunity. I mentioned that Melissa has been part of the Fusion Steering Committee for several years, but they've also hosted us at DePaul a couple of times for our in-person connection events. And that's always been great. Really appreciate that. I did post something in the chat about a gamification network connection. So because of the pandemic, we're still not able to do connection events in person. We hope to maybe by the end of this year, but we'll see. So we are going to do some virtual, some online connection events, which are basically just, you know, several presentations on theme. And so gamification is one of those, and you'll get more information about that coming up. So a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'll just mention one, and so turn it back to you. Lauren says, are there any copyright concerns when using Monopoly board or other existing products?
So yeah, definitely. But because these are being used for educational use, and because the instructor actually owns the physical amount of boards that we created digitally, I didn't find it to be problematic. I don't know that that's a good legal response. It's not something that we're sharing by and large. It's certainly not something that I'm distributing freely or anything like that. Like the instructor knows that though the Google Slides that were created were only to be used during that one synchronous class session. And I actually have checked in a couple times just to make sure that they weren't reused, and they weren't, because I can see the edit history. But I felt comfortable assessing that that would be fine, because I know that she owns the exact amount of Monopoly boards that we recreated, and that in any other given year, she will be using the physical boards that she owns.
There's another question with regards to, Lynn had a question. She said she has a course in which the information they have to learn changes often, too often for a textbook, and links break all the time. Do you have any ideas for a game involving research for the new information?
I might steal this one. So I actually teach research writing. So my class is all about teaching students how to do research. And one of my favorite lessons I learned from one of my teachers in college, which is do not try and BS your way out of a situation. And if you don't know the answer, you make your students help you research it on the fly. So I actually have my students help me do research all the time in the classroom. So if you are teaching live, doing games with them where you send them into breakout rooms, give them like a scavenger hunt task where they have to go help you research the information and build maybe like an encyclopedia for your class that quarter. Or if it's an asynchronous class, something like what Melissa and I are talking about. Mine is actually called Research in the Wild, because they have to go find examples of how people present research to the world, and how either good or badly they contextualize that research, and they have to bring that back to the class and then represent the details. So you can either have them do that synchronously and create a document, or maybe asynchronously and create kind of like a class anthology or class encyclopedia, and kind of put it in their hands to say, like, you need to help us create this living document for the classroom.
Jess, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly add, you could also frame it as like a scavenger hunt and say that these are things that were here before. These are broken links that no longer exist. Find something to fit XYZ specification and frame it in that way. I've done stuff like that with my students where I just say, like, you know, I need you to find something that fits all of these parameters. And if you frame it that way, it feels like a scavenger hunt. It feels like fun. So
yeah. I've told them, you know, I don't have the answer for this. Let's go look it up together. Here's how we might find this answer.
It's also a really good opportunity to bring in evaluation, which from an information literacy standpoint, my background's in library science. And as we know, in this day and age, information literacy is so very important, in the fact that the first thing you find may or may not be real. And so how do you evaluate the credibility and the relevance and the, you know, all of those things about the things that you're finding. So, you know, years and years and years ago, we used to do this in the library, you know, when the web was new, right? Dinosaurs roamed the earth. I guess they didn't have flip phones, the dinosaurs didn't, but so that idea of, you know, going through that process, having students hear you do the thought process of how you evaluate, having them go through that process as well. So, you know, as Carrie and Jess both mentioned, that idea of creating a game out of it, but also showing your vulnerability as an instructor to say, I know what the steps are that I would take, but I don't know the answer. So let's find the answer. I'm going to teach you how I find the answer, and then how to evaluate what it is that we find. And we can do that as a group.
Okay. Well, I think that we can probably wrap it up. Looks like the questions have slowed down to, well, to nothing, actually. But great job on answering that. The thank yous are starting to come in. And so I think we will wrap it up. I will just thank the three of you for coming in and sharing your time with us again. And I will let any or all of you finish it off and say goodbye to the group.
So yeah, just thanks for everybody for the questions and for attending today. And I'm happy that we could maybe share some ideas and, you know, start you thinking about some different ways that are some easy ways. Because again, I think when we often think about gamification, we think about complex simulations, which Jess has certainly built, that require programming and all of those types of things. And hopefully we've given you some ideas that inspire you to try some things that don't require, you know, a long production or a lot of expense.
And have fun. Have fun.
Yeah, have
with
fun.
these things. That's I think the other thing too is gamification doesn't need to be exhausting and it doesn't need to be hard. Sometimes they're just like when Melissa was building those Mad Libs, I think Jess and I had a ton of fun helping her test them.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
Have fun with these things too. Like you will have fun building them and your students will have so much fun using them.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.